Hey, Becky, so I know we had plans to go out tonight, but it seems like the Black Plague has struck again, so yeah, I know, it's just so inconvenient. Hello, YouTube! Welcome to part 3 of Alison's brief guide to music history. Today, we delve into one of the coolest periods of music history, the Renaissance. For those who don't know, the word Renaissance means rebirth, which is a good term for it because the Renaissance was a rebirth of Greek and Roman philosophy, scientific thought, education, and humanism. There were many technological and artistic developments during this time. One of the most significant was the artistic development of linear perspective, which went a long way to making paintings look much more realistic. Here is an example of a painting before linear perspective, and here is the painting with linear perspective. As you can see, big difference! Now, if you watched last week's video about medieval music history, you'll remember that I ended with something of a cliffhanger. Something big happened to propel music into the Renaissance period. What could it be? The big happening was actually an invention, the printing press. This enabled the distribution of music to happen at a much larger scale because music didn't have to be copied by hand, which made for a lot less carpal tunnel in monks. With music being much more accessible and much cheaper to buy, a lot of developments occurred in music, especially in the non-religious genres. The first part of the Renaissance had such notables as John Dunstable, Gilbert Choix, and Guillaume Dufay. Like I mentioned in the past video, these guys were pretty much responsible for more rhythmic vitality and the development of a drive to a cadence. A cadence is a moment in a piece when all notes become harmonic with each other and you're filled with that home sense of peace and tranquility, like right now. Side note, my friend actually named his car after Dufay. And actually, Dufay had a really nasty childhood that I'm definitely going to devote an entire video to. It's really sad. One of the big things that developed in the Renaissance was the Mass. It had its roots in the medieval period, but it's really in the Renaissance that it takes off. There's an interesting technique used in a lot of masses of this time called, for lack of better words, borrowing. Composers would often take a melody written by someone else and use it as the foundation for their own piece. Today, people get sued for that. But back then it was normal. The use of this as precedence has been attempted in some legal cases. It usually doesn't work. The middle period of the Renaissance is what really became affected by the printing press. Since music was so much cheaper to make and sell, composers reached a larger audience and they had greater renown. This large amount of easily accessible sheet music led to a lot of amateur musicians who would get together with their friends and perform in their homes. This made a large market for secular music. When I say secular, I mean not religious. And in this instance, when I say not religious, I mean downright scandalous, even by today's standards. It was not uncommon for a secular motet, madrigal, chanson to include such topics as rape, extramarital affairs, bestiality, and even orgasms. I can't think of many popular songs today that discuss those subjects. Two of the most famous composers of secular madrigals and motets are Nicolas Gombert and Cipriano de Rore. This bloom of secular music didn't actually inhibit the development of sacred music. Do you remember that polyphony that I talked about in the last video? Well, polyphony continued into the Renaissance, and it became very dense and very complicated. One of the big trends in the Middle Renaissance was the use of canon. A canon is where a melody is imitated in other voices. A cool technique developed during this time was the mensuration canon. No, not a menstruation canon. That would be gross. A mensuration canon is a type of canon, but instead of having the other voices imitate the melody at the same pace, they imitate the melody at different tempos, or different mensurations. You might say, oh, well that sounds kind of easy, but no, it's incredibly difficult to make sure that it always sounds good. We are currently listening to a mensuration canon by Johannes Ockeghem, one of the giants of the mid-Renaissance sacred music. Another big guy in sacred music at this time was Josquin des Prés. His music is absolutely gorgeous and often makes me swoon. His music tends to be a bit simpler than Ockeghem, and his text is usually easier to understand. Some people are super obsessed with Josquin. I actually know someone who spends his entire life researching and studying Josquin. And he even named his cat Joscat. Seriously. The last 65 years of the Renaissance period are known as the Late Renaissance period. Super inventive name, guys. The powerhouse of music during this time was something called the Roman School. The Roman School was a group of composers who wrote for the church in Rome. The most famous composer of this time was Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. His music is still often performed today by choirs all over the world. It's pretty cool that your music can last that long. Way to go, Palestrina! There was another well-known group of composers at the same time in England. They wrote a cappella, or without accompaniment, madrigals for 3 to 6 voices that were very light and easy listening. The big guy of that group was William Byrd, and he was the personal favorite of Queen Elizabeth. Fun fact. So like I said at the beginning, the Renaissance is characterized by this rebirth of Greek and Roman philosophy. But actually people started to get so into Greek philosophy on music that it actually fundamentally changed the way that music would develop. What could do such a thing? Be sure to check in next week for part 4 of Alison's brief guide to music history. Next week's topic is the Baroque. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Musicology.